Hi class, welcome to History 130. I'm your instructor Matthew Ovitz, and I wanted to make a quick video to introduce you to the course. Of course, you should take a look at the course website and the syllabus if you can, if you get a chance before our first class. But that's not what this video is about. This video is more of a big picture idea video about what this course is all about. Alright, because you might be feeling a bit like this right now. Oh, History 130, so interesting, tell me more. I understand not everyone's super interested in history. Some students are. It depends, but in case you're not, this is kind of a chance for me to sell you on the course. Alright, so why does this course exist even in the first place from a practical point of view? Well, I think it is there mainly to satisfy what I call the citizenship degree requirement at OTC. According to OTC's catalog, course catalog website, it says students must take appropriate courses to satisfy the requirements in state and federal constitutions and in American history and regulatory infrastructures. So American law, government, and American history, which I know regulatory infrastructure sounds so exciting, right? So as far as I understand, there are three ways students can fulfill this degree requirement. History 120, which is the first half of American history. History 130, which is this course. The second half of American history, which is from after the Civil War to the present. History 120 is up to the Civil War, basically. And then there's Political Science 101. So as far as I understand, don't take my word on this, talk to your advisor, make sure you're meeting your degree requirements. But as far as I understand, these are the three different options you have for meeting this, what I call the citizenship requirement, to learn about American law and history, American government. And why does OTC think that it's so important for every single student to learn about this sort of stuff? Why do they want to make sure that everyone exiting OTC with an associate's degree or transferring to another college or university, that every single student has exposure to this sort of thing? Why is it so important? After all, compare it with a course like Automotive 121, Engine Diagnosis and Repair. All right, very important course, very useful, arguably more practical than these three different citizenship course options I just showed you. So why isn't Automotive Technology 121 a required course for all degree seekers at OTC? After all, wouldn't it be useful for everyone to be able to troubleshoot problems with their engines? I like this meme. Check engine. Yep, it's still there, right? If that's you, then consider, why doesn't OTC encourage you or force you to take this course, as a required part of your degree? Might that even be more useful than History 120 or 130 or Political Science 101? And aren't cars even kind of part of what American culture is all about? So, if we're concerned about our students learning about America, what's more American than some cars, right? Than knowledge about how to work on your car and stuff. We're a very car-centric society, for practical and stylistic reasons. So, why not encourage or force every student to learn about this? I think a big difference is our society and OTC has the opinion that not everybody needs to know about cars, that we can specialize and hand this problem off to experts in that field. Let the experts handle it if something's not right with my car, while I specialize in doing accounting or being a sales clerk at a store, whatever I do for a job. It's more efficient as a society in that way if we specialize and then trade our goods and services. That seems to be the view with something like automotive repair. But it is not our view, not most people's view of how to handle citizenship. For some reason, citizenship is different. We don't just let the experts handle our decision making when it comes to being citizens. All right. And when I'm talking about citizenship, I'm talking about two aspects of that. One is the formal collective decision making. So formal means things that are written down explicitly, that are clear, and where there's clear procedures for how you make certain decisions, versus informal, which means things with unwritten rules, with unspoken rules. Um, so it's the difference between walking into a supermarket and there might or might not be a formal rule about wearing shirts and shoes. Some gas stations or supermarkets have a formal, explicit written rule that say no shirt, no shoes, no service. But in any case, even if a place doesn't have a formal rule, an explicit written rule about something, they might have an informal expectation that you wear shirt and shoes. So if you walk in to a place, you're not wearing shirt and shoes, you might get odd looks, or you might get questioned by the manager and say, why aren't you wearing shirt and shoes? You need to leave. And you might say, well, there was no written rule against that, right? But certain things in our society are informal. They're not spelled out. They're subtle. I don't know how to explain it, but these cultural norms, these expectations about how we're supposed to behave on an everyday basis. These are also aspects of our behavior as citizens. As citizens, we don't just do things like vote for the president or vote for other representatives or vote for certain laws. We also do things like influence the culture around us, influence the norms around us, influence our society in these more subtle ways. And this is something that, this is an effect that people have, even people who are not legal American citizens, but let's say people just living in America as residents, either legally or illegally, if they're on a work visa or if they just hopped across the border. Even they, to some extent, participate as citizens in American society in this sense, which some people might consider a good thing, some people might consider a bad thing, that they're allowed to have this effect or influence on American society. But they do, for better or worse, they do have an effect on shaping our culture or norms and whatnot. And this is something that everyone in America does. So, and whether you like getting involved in voting, in the formal decision-making powers that you might have as a legal citizen, whether or not you do that, you inevitably have informal, subtle effects on your society around you. You shape norms, expectations through things you say. You convey certain ideas of what is proper or what is acceptable to say in polite company, or the way you're supposed to behave when you're, I don't know, standing in line at a supermarket. Do you just shove everyone out of the way? Do you wait patiently? How do you greet people? Do you do a handshake? How impartial are you supposed to be? How much favoritism are you supposed to show in the workplace? To let's say near relatives of you, your brother, your cousin, or your sister. Is it acceptable to, give them preferential treatment for hiring them and giving them raises and stuff? These are kind of to a certain extent, cultural expectations, although they can also be made into explicit legal expectations too, depending on whether society sees fit. But there's all sorts of ways in which we inescapably have an effect on society, at the very least informally, if not also formally. And there's really no way, I guess there is a way we could let the experts handle all these things. They could We could consult experts to tell us what clothes are we going to wear today. How are we going to, um, stand in line or walk down the street, or what kind of music are we going to listen to, or you know, we could do that if we wanted to. I suspect a lot of Americans wouldn't be satisfied with that. So, insofar as that is the case, we are destined to have to make these decisions by ourselves. We can't just let the experts handle it. So we have to become informed and gain a wider perspective and a more informed decision about what kind of effect am I having on society, or at least it would seem to be in our interest to have everyone reflect on that if they are going to be having these effects on society and making these decisions. And we'd rather have people make informed decisions um, than ones where they're just um, shooting from the cuff or going with their gut, which might not always be, it might help to learn how have other people approach this problem of, what are gender relations supposed to be like? What's the proper, what are some proper ways that husbands and wives should relate to each other, or boyfriends and girlfriends? What are the appropriate boundaries with that? That's a part of culture. That's a part of citizenship in a way. That's a part of American history, as we'll see. Ideas about this have changed, so insofar as we're not willing to let experts handle that, tell us how to date, how to do all these things in daily life, then we have to figure them out ourselves. And it's probably best that we all take some time to reflect on, are we making the right decision? We might just say, well, just stick with tradition, stick with what my parents taught me. That's the way to go. Is that necessarily always the right? Is that the best way? Maybe those rules were okay for our society in the past in a different context. Maybe they're still functional and good rules for our society, but then again, maybe they're not. I don't know. Or can we improve upon them? Some people maybe would not like us to question these sorts of things, but um, even by questioning them, doesn't necessarily mean that you overturn your previous ideas. You might discover additional reasons for why let's say you have like traditional ideas about how dating is supposed to happen, or this or that. You might discover additional reasons for why you were right all along, and we should hold even stronger to traditions. Or you might find reasons to want to change those traditions. That's all part of citizenship. That's kind of all part of this course for you to question that. And it's because we can't just let the experts handle it like we can with cars. All right, so we have to study this sort of thing and think about it. Another difference between cars and citizenship is cars have some clearly defined objectives. They're supposed to move us from point A to point B safely, sustainably, where the car's not messing up its engine. You don't change your oil in 20,000 miles or something. Or if you almost drive underwater like I almost did the other day with all this rain we've been having. Almost drove across what I thought was only like 6 inches of rain across the roadway, but it ended up being a lot deeper than that. So about a quarter of the way across, I stopped and like, okay, put it in reverse. This is not, I'm sinking a little too deep. Hopefully I didn't do any long-term damage to my Honda Civic. We'll see, but you kind of know whether your car is doing what it should be doing, or at least there are ways of finding out, if you're accomplishing these objectives. To be able to travel with style, that's another objective. Although one that's more ideal than, if you're like me, you might not want to spend the money on fixing a dent in your car just because it doesn't convey the style that you're going for. But automobile is at least a little more, it's apparent when you need to take it to the experts. even if you're not sure exactly what the problem is, a lot of times you can tell if there is a problem. If there's a funny sound that you're not used to, when you buy a new car, that kind of sets the benchmark for the sounds the car is supposed to make, how it's supposed to operate. Anything other than that is a sign that maybe the expert should take a look at it. But one reason why we can't just have experts handle our society and our citizenship is we're not even clear of when there's a problem. Can we say a society needs fixing if it does not do X or Y or Z? What are those things that society should be doing, where we can say if it's not doing those things, society is dysfunctional? What does it mean for society to be dysfunctional? It's kind of unclear. There's not a clear consensus. I mean, people have their own ideas about this sort of thing, but they have widely varying ideas. A much broader spectrum of ideas than you'll find, I think, with cars, where people can more agree on that the point of a car is to do all these, various things. What's the point of society? There's all sorts of ideas about that. And citizens. Can we say that citizens need improvement when they do not do what? Follow the laws? Is that all we expect citizens to do, is follow the laws, not break the law? Is that all? As we'll see here later on in the presentation, I think it's very possible for someone to be a subpar citizen, or even a very, very bad citizen, even if they follow the letter of the law and never break a single law. Okay, well, Adolf Hitler, just to give you a spoiler alert, is one decent example of that, where a lot of what he did actually technically was not against the law. All right. Some of what he did was against the law. Early in his career, he tried to overthrow the government in 1923 and all this stuff. But when he really came to power and had his greatest effect on German society, a lot of what he accomplished was technically legal. That doesn't mean that he was being a good citizen. That doesn't mean that he was having a positive influence on German society or on the world just because what he was doing technically was legal. So I don't think it's enough just to follow the laws to be a good citizen. I think there are other ways that citizens could use some improvement in their behavior, even if they're following all the laws. I think we can say that ideally they should be going above and beyond that, thinking critically about their influence on society, the choices that they're making in politics. Just to follow the laws is as a passing grade, you might say. It gets you a D maybe, as it doesn't get you an A. So part of the problem with citizenship that makes it different from automobiles is defining its objectives. What are we supposed to be doing as citizens? A car is supposed to get us from point A to point B. What are citizens supposed to do? Are we supposed to maximize our country's wealth? Are we supposed to maximize the world's wealth? Are we supposed to preserve life at all costs? Preserve freedom, happiness. And whose happiness? Our own happiness, or the average happiness of everyone in society, even if it comes at the expense of my own happiness or someone else's happiness? There's no consensus on this sort of thing, really. People have widely varying ideas about this. And even if we did agree on what we value, there's a question of measuring these things, and especially measuring them in comparison to what ought to be achievable. So, for example, take Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the president of the United States during the Great Depression and during World War II. So, should we say that he was a horrible president because under his, when he was president, American GDP was not very, American GDP growth was not very good, let's say, compared to the 1920s. That a lot of Americans lost their lives under his presidency. Over 400,000 Americans were killed in World War II while Franklin Roosevelt was president. Well, obviously that makes him a horrible president. Almost basically a mass murderer, it would sound like, right? But then again, let's ask, what are we comparing that to? All right, if someone else had been president and had made different decisions, would fewer people have died, or would even more people have died? What's the benchmark for comparison? Would we have had more economic growth or even less economic growth? Was things like the Dust Bowl, to a certain extent, were kind of man-made problems, but were also to a certain extent acts of nature. And so you can't hold, let's say, a president solely responsible for that. You could say a different president would have handled the situation even more poorly. And so what's the benchmark of comparison? The problem with identifying that benchmark for comparison is we can't run reproducible controlled experiments in American history or in world history. We can't rerun the Great Depression or rerun World War II, keeping all the other variables the same except changing, let's say, who was president. So let's say we have someone else as president who decides to not retaliate against Japan after Japan attacked and bombed the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. Would that have led to fewer American deaths and greater life expectancy? Would it have led to more deaths and a worse life expectancy for Americans on average? Because it might have emboldened the Japanese to attack us even more elsewhere. Or it might have emboldened others to attack us, if we didn't stand up for our own safety and security against like such a brazen attack. So what's the benchmark of comparison? How can we say that any actual achieved level of these things was good or bad compared to what we ought to have been able to achieve? It's tricky. This is a way in which history is different from automobile repair, where we know what an automobile of a certain model ought to be capable of doing, and if it doesn't rise to that benchmark level of horsepower and emission standards and safety and whatnot, then we can say this automobile is deficient. But can we say that people are being deficient in their citizenship, or that our society is being deficient if we only achieve, let's say, 2% economic growth per year? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should we ought to be able to achieve 5%, in which case 2% is a sign that we're doing something seriously wrong? Or maybe 2% is a stellar achievement because under ordinary circumstances we would only be achieving 1% growth. And the fact that we're achieving 2% is outstanding, It's tricky. Depends a lot on one's ideas about how the economy is supposed to work, and what experiences in American history are standard and par for the course versus being exceptional and the anomaly. So that's tricky. And also this question of, are trade-offs worth it? So let's say we value all these things. Let's say I want to, as a citizen, help maximize America's wealth and maybe my own wealth. I want to maximize America's life expectancy and my own life expectancy. I want to maximize America's freedom and my own freedom. Same thing with happiness and so on. But so if I value all these things at the same time, there might be situations where I can't increase all of them. If I increase one thing, it's going to come at the expense of something else. So how do I make that trade-off? If there's a workplace safety law, a regulation, where people have to wear certain harnesses when they're engaging in work, up in the air, let's say on some tall structure, let's say it's going to slow things down and cost businesses and let's say it's going to cost America in general $100 million in lost output per year. But it's going to save 50 lives on average each year. So, $2 million each year to save one life on average. Is that a worthwhile trade-off? To lose that economic output to save 50 lives? I don't know. People will probably disagree about where you fine tune those trade-offs. So it's tricky, right? Another difference between citizenship and automobile repair is automobile repair will tend to give you more immediate feedback of whether you're doing it right or not. You know, so let's say OTC does a horrible job in training its students in automobile repair. They go out into the workforce, and the cars that they work on end up looking like this after they drive out of the service station. Well, those students might, probably get fired at that point. They're going to have immediate, tangible feedback to show them that they are not being very good automobile mechanics. And also, by extension, this means that OTC wasn't doing a very good job in training them as automobile mechanics. That their instructors weren't doing a very good job. And this is what educators in today's lingo would call an authentic assessment, which is different than like just taking a standardized test where you take a multiple choice test over certain questions about doing automotive work. Where are the brakes are located, near the visor, A, by the steering wheel, B, that would be one type of assessment. But an authentic assessment would be having OTC students actually try to repair some brakes on a car. And if the car functions, well or not, that's an authentic assessment. That's an authentic feedback, to show whether they've really mastered this objective that they're supposed to have mastered. So, but what about history and citizenship, though? How does OTC, how can we measure whether our students are, being good citizens or have mastered American history? What kind of authentic tests can we administer? We can administer multiple choice tests and even essay questions. There's all sorts of things like that, but they're not really authentic assessments. An authentic assessment would be, OTC students going out into the world, and over the next 25 years, they have various influences on the society around them. And after those 25 years, society is either a little bit better or a little bit worse, based on their, interactions with society and their, did this person get into all sorts of legal trouble and cause all sorts of people grief and misery and tragedy? Did the person steal or murder? That would probably be an example of bad citizenship, according to most people. Or did they, let's say, follow the letter of the law, but otherwise not really go out of their way to improve their society? In which we could say, in that case, we could maybe say that they earned a passing grade as a citizen, but they weren't really like an ideal citizen, Or did they go out and improve their society, actively? And how do we measure whether they improve their society or not? It's not like any one person usually has a very big tangible influence on the society around them. We can't say, you said this one hateful thing to your neighbor 8 years ago, and that was one of the 10 different factors that caused your neighbor to lapse into depression, which made your overall society worse. We don't get that sort of feedback. We can't measure those sorts of effects to such a fine scale. So it's unfortunately kind of unclear for me as an instructor whether my students are meeting the objectives of learning citizenship skills from this course. They can pass the final exam and whatnot, and that's great and all, but still, as they walk out of class into the world, into American society, I can only hope that they're going to be good citizens. There's not really, an automotive instructor, I think, would have more certainty about whether those students have mastered the automotive skills. It's hard for me to tell whether my students have mastered the citizenship skills that they're supposed to have learned in my course. I mean, partly also because our society disagrees about what those skills are even supposed to be. There's less consensus on this, other than just the bare minimum of not breaking the law, so it's tricky, one clear example, bad citizenship, would probably be Adolf Hitler. Once again, we don't know what the baseline outcomes would have been for Germany and the world if Hitler had not been in power or had not existed at the time. We can't say exactly how much wealthier Germany would be, or how many more soldiers would have survived, or how much more freedom there would have been in Germany. How do you even quantify that? But historians do kind of have a consensus that Hitler brought these things down to a certain extent. We might debate about how much, but this is one rare case where there is kind of a consensus that someone was a bad citizen. And the problem with this is he did most of these actions were legal. So once again, it's not enough to just not break the law, to follow the law. You can still be a horrible citizen and still follow the law, especially if you can get yourself into power and then change the laws to do the things that you wanted to do anyways. And you can convince other people to let you do that, because it's not like Hitler did all these things single-handedly. He had many accomplices, many ordinary German citizens who approved of what he was doing, especially early on, and who thought that Hitler would go down in history as the best German citizen ever, that he was bringing glory and wealth and power to Germany, and safety and security, and even freedom. Maybe a different sort of freedom. The freedom to express one's German culture unfettered from evil Jewish influence. People had kind of, I think, warped ideas about this sort of thing, but it was not obvious to Germans or even everyone else in the world at the time that Germany, or that Hitler, would go down as one of the world's worst citizens. At least it wasn't clear until about the late 1930s. And Hitler was not penalized for his bad citizenship until the very end, when he had no choice but to commit suicide or else be captured by the invading Soviet army that was invading Germany, or liberating Germany at the end of the war, depending on how you look at it. So, there is no authentic assessment that has immediate feedback like there is with automobile repair. My OTC students, in this semester, you could do just fine on the tests and then go out and kind of skate by and not really think too much about citizenship thereafter, and you won't really get immediately penalized for it. It's not like you're going to make less money, probably, or lose your job for just being a subpar citizen who just doesn't break the law, but otherwise you don't really go out of your way to try to make informed decisions or have a positive cultural influence on society around you, or think about your actions. You can just sort of skate by, and there won't really be clear feedback on that, perhaps until 30 years later, when, if other people have done the same thing as you, they've kind of skated by, attended to their daily life, not really tried to make the world a better place, not really thought about the influence they're having on the culture around them. You might wake up one day and realize, man, American society has really deteriorated. Like, things just aren't fun anymore. Things are not wholesome anymore. Life sucks. People treat me horribly, and no one has any manners anymore. Or, you might have all sorts of gripes about the way culture is, or the policies that your government is following. You might say, why on earth are we, engaging in this military action? Or why do we have this economic policy that's, who decided this? Why? How did we end up in this subpar situation? Well, maybe it was because, millions of people like you, didn't, not to lecture, I don't want to assume that OTC students are going to neglect their citizenship duties, but let's just say you don't think about citizenship. That might be the eventual feedback. You wake up in a society that you don't particularly like, and now it might take even more effort to change it after the fact, to reverse these problems, you know. So, but that's why it's tricky, because in the meantime, you might not see these problems coming. You might think you can just skate by, and as long as there aren't too many other people like you, as long as there are some people who are watching out for us, some political experts that are making good decisions, or some cultural authorities that are carefully considering how we behave in society and the norms that we are setting, then maybe we can just let the experts handle it. They can tell us how to live, and which traditions to follow, and I don't have to worry about that too much. Maybe you can do that, but I personally don't have the confidence in that sort of thing. I don't trust, I don't know, tradition or other people enough to just assume that, oh, the experts will get it right. I don't need to think about how I behave in society or what decisions I make in politics. I don't know. I guess I have the time to spare, and I kind of just have the mindset that I want to find out for myself what the best decisions are to make as a citizen. Maybe that's just me. Maybe we will, as a society, move towards more of a model of let the experts handle it. In fact, we have, as a society, moved in that direction to a certain extent, especially since the early 1900s. Something we'll talk about in the course is a trend starting in the progressive era, where experts more and more were put in charge of designing regulations and designing moral legislation to regulate things like alcohol consumption and drug consumption, and standardized curriculum in schools instead of letting individual teachers or school districts decide. American society started to move more in that direction of let's let the experts tell us what decisions to make, how to live, and that trend came with varying degrees of resistance and disagreement over that. But maybe we'll move more in that direction as time goes on. Maybe we'll move back in the opposite direction of Americans wanting to make more of their own decisions about how they live, what decisions they make politically. Another example recently of bad citizenship would be, I think, this recent incident in San Diego, where a shooter, I guess like a neo-Nazi shooter, went into a Jewish synagogue and killed a couple of people there. And he published a manifesto before doing this, where he gave his reasons for doing this. And in this manifesto, he said, quote, "Every Jew is responsible for the meticulously planned genocide of the European race. Their crimes are endless." And, if a student presented something like this as a research paper, my first reaction would be, you need to cite your sources on where you're getting this, citation needed, because I'm not convinced just by this that you have any grasp on reality, or any, this is not a persuasive argument that convinces me that your actions were justified. I need to know what on earth are you talking about with these crimes, and how can you prove that every Jew is responsible for these alleged crimes, assuming they even exist? What do you mean genocide of the European race? I don't really see that going on. I mean, can you convince me that this is happening? And this, you would need, extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, as the saying goes. So the more extraordinary the claim, such as that every Jew is responsible for the meticulously planned genocide of the European race, you would need some extraordinary evidence to back up that claim. If a student had that sort of evidence, or if they could if they could cite specific information for this in a research paper, that would be the most astonishing research paper ever. That would overthrow, you know, um, so many preconceived ideas about how the world works. Basically, it would be like, in physics, overturning the theory of relativity or something, or it'd be like, it would be, but you would need so much specific evidence to show that this was the case. And I've never seen that evidence, obviously, and I don't think this particular, uh, neo-Nazi came anywhere close to uh, putting up a persuasive argument with supporting details and supporting evidence to support this extraordinary claim. So as a research paper, this would obviously get an F, because this is not a persuasive argument. It's not been supported with sufficient detail to make it persuasive, to make this astonishing and extraordinary claim persuasive. And if this student had been in one of my courses, I would hope that I would have maybe gotten this student to think critically about these ideas and delve further into, is there really specific information? Are there primary sources to back this up? Is there historical evidence to really back this up? Like specific historical evidence, not just like stereotypes and prejudices about Jews and generalizations and, things you saw on one random website, but like, do you actually have the amount of specific evidence you would need to justify this extraordinary claim? If not, then I would hope to be able to convince a student like this away from these ideas and maybe help them become a better citizen in this sense, to not cause these unnecessary fatalities. So that's one example of where citizenship can be very, relevant. And a lot of times you might think you're not interested in citizenship or American history, but where these things might be very interested in you, or let's say you happen to be an unfortunate bystander in this locality who got wounded, let's say. That's a case where history or someone else's citizenship is intruding upon you. So even if you never wanted to learn about citizenship, well, now it's on your doorstep. Same thing with the attack at Pearl Harbor. When America entered World War II, the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor. That's a case where even Americans who didn't care to learn anything about Japan, well, didn't matter that they weren't interested in Japan, because Japan was interested in them. They history intruded upon their doorstep, and whether they liked it or not. Same thing with 9/11. Same thing with a lot of other, with economic crises. It doesn't matter if you're not really interested in economics. Economics is going to be affecting you. Economics is interested in you. So you're going to have to deal with it in some way or the other, and prepare for it and respond to these challenges, which Americans have generally been a little bit more insulated from the worst sort of historical crises, like compared to other nationalities, like Russian citizens, for example, have had to endure several revolutions in their past 100 years and several like huge, large-scale invasions, and big historical events have intruded upon them, and they've had to figure out, how am I going to respond to this? What am I going to be willing to sacrifice so that my family isn't gunned down by invading Nazi Germans? Americans have had to deal with that to a certain extent, but not on as extreme of a level. We haven't. The last time we've had to deal with something like that has been the Civil War, where it's like, okay, Confederate, soldiers are knocking on my door and demanding that or Union soldiers, or, they're demanding that I take a side in this. What am I going to do? Usually we're more insulated from big historical crises because we're a big, prosperous, powerful country. So we think, oh, we don't have to worry about these sorts of historical crises visiting us on our doorstep. But there probably will be in our lifetimes things of similar magnitude where we're going to have to figure out how to respond. And if we want to respond intelligently and not lose our heads and run around like chickens with their heads cut off and panic, and then we should probably study how America has responded and other countries have responded to these sorts of crises in the past, and whether those responses were beneficial or not beneficial. And then once again, there's not going to be easy definitive answers of was this a good response or a bad response historically, because once again we go back to the benchmarks. What was the alternative scenario? It's tricky to figure out, but we can kind of in some cases get a rough idea. So this course is about the fact that you are forced to be an expert on citizenship and society, whether you like it or not. That means that I think you should embrace the responsibility and be interested in what this course has to offer on that. So I look forward to this semester. Say hello to Hazel, my Irish Terrier here. Hazel, look at here. You're on camera. Yeah. Woo. And I will see you in class. Bye-bye.